Nurse gave CPR to a veteran and was suspended. By noon, a military official walked into the ICU. What did you just do? I saved his life. You broke protocol, Clara. You're suspended. Effective immediately. He was dying, and now your career might be dead too. If you believe saving lives should never be punished, hit like and subscribe. The system doesn't change unless we speak up. It was 8:02 a.m. when the scream shattered the sterile hum of St. Mary's ICU. Clara Reynolds was updating charts at the central nurse station. Her fifth coffee had gone cold on the desk beside her when the emergency alarm sounded from room 214. Her head snapped up. Then came the voice, panicked, raw. He's not breathing. Clara didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, she pushed back from the desk, sprinted down the hall, and burst through the glass door. Leonard Garrison, 62 years old, lay motionless. A Vietnam veteran admitted 2 days earlier for acute pneumonia. His chest had stilled. His monitor flatlined, a relentless tone vibrating through the air. Dead silence and frequency. No doctors in sight. Clara's training kicked in faster than her thoughts. Call a code red, she shouted over her shoulder. Get the crash cart. Now nurses nearby froze, paralyzed, not from incompetence, but from fear. The ICU protocols at St. Mary's were rigid. Only physicians could initiate CPR or direct a code. Any deviation could mean a lawsuit or a firing. But Clara had seen death, and she wasn't about to watch it happen in front of her again. She climbed onto the bed without permission. Knees anchored beside Leonard's ribs, she interlaced her fingers, centered her palms, and began compressions. 1, 2, 3. She counted aloud, sweat beginning to form under her bangs. Leonard's skin was pale, lips, blue eyes glassed over. No pulse, no response. The weight of each push vibrated through her arms and shoulders. But she didn't stop. A younger nurse arrived with the defibrillator, eyes wide, hands shaking. You want to charge to 200, Clara barked. Clear. The first shock hit. Leonard's body jumped. Nothing. Another round of compressions. Clara's arms screamed in protest. Again, charge 300. Clear, second shock. Then movement. A flutter. A heartbeat. The monitor chirped, no longer a flat line, but a rhythm, irregular, faint, but there. Leonard's chest rose slightly on its own. Clara dropped her hands. Her breath came in gasps. She had done it. And then the door slammed open. Karen Mitchell stood there, stern gray blazer over navy scrubs, clipboard in hand, lips pursed so tight they nearly disappeared. What the hell is going on? Another nurse tried to speak. Clara? Leonard crashed. The doctor wasn't here yet, and Karen cut her off. Her eyes bore into Clara, who was still kneeling on the bed. Did you perform CPR? Yes. Clara said, chest still heaving. There was no one else. He was gone. You're not authorized to make that call. He's alive. That doesn't matter, Karen's snapped voice rising. You overstepped. You violated St. Mary's protocol. Then came the moment Clara would replay in her mind again and again. Karen reached forward and unclipped Clara's ID badge from her lanyard. You're suspended. Effective immediately. It felt like someone had pulled the floor out from under her. A silence followed, heavier than the code alarm, heavier than Leonard's lifeless body had been just minutes earlier. No one spoke. Not the younger nurse with the defibrillator. Not the intern who had just arrived, eyes wide with disbelief. And certainly not Clara, who climbed down from the bed, hands trembling, tears forming in the corners of her eyes, not because she was weak, but because she had done everything right. And somehow it was being treated like the worst mistake of her life. 2 hours later, Clara sat in her tiny apartment, staring blankly at the cup of now cold coffee in her hand. She hadn't cried. Not yet. Her phone buzzed on the table. A message from HR, meeting scheduled tomorrow, 10:00 a.m. Possible grounds for termination. Please bring any statements in your defense. Defense. She thought of Leonard, of how his eyes had opened just briefly as the monitor beeped, of how his hand had moved, of the breath he took. Was that not enough? Apparently not. She opened her laptop, Googled, can nurses get fired for performing CPR? Hundreds of results. Too many with the same answer. Yes. Her chest tightened. What Clara didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that down the hall of St. Mary's ICU in room 214, Leonard Garrison had just opened his eyes again and whispered one name, the red-haired nurse. And elsewhere, just 2 floors below, a tall man with silver hair and military posture stood outside the elevator doors, a badge pinned to his chest, 2 stars on each shoulder. Colonel James Garrison had arrived, and the first thing he said as he stepped off the elevator was, "Where's the nurse who saved my brother's life?" Colonel James Garrison didn't waste time. He hadn't worn his full dress uniform in years. But this morning when the call came from the ICU, he put it on with the same gravity as he had during funeral honors. Leonard, his younger brother, was alive only because of a nurse who had broken the rules. Now she was being punished. Unacceptable, James muttered as the car pulled into St. Mary's. He entered through the main lobby. Civilians parted instinctively. The medals on his chest weren't just decoration. They told stories of command, of loss of honor. His posture alone said everything a man used to being obeyed, but who never stopped fighting when challenged. A security guard moved to intercept him. "Sir, you'll need to get me the hospital director." "Now." The guard hesitated. James simply handed over a leather folder containing credentials. At the top, United States Army Red Eye. Clearance level, Federal Liaison, PJAR, Veteran Medical Affairs. 15 minutes later, James stood in the executive boardroom of St. Mary's Medical Center. Across from him sat Dr. Elizabeth Warner, hospital director, mid-50s, professionally poised with a clipboard of printed policies in front of her. Next to her sat Karen Mitchell, still in her gray blazer, still expressionless. "Colonel Garrison," Dr. Warner began, "we were informed that your brother is a patient here and that you've raised concerns about the conduct of one of our nurses." "No," James interrupted, voice firm. "My concern isn't with the nurse. My concern is with you." Warner blinked. "Excuse me." James leaned forward slightly, planting both gloved hands on the table. "Nurse Clara Reynolds saved my brother's life yesterday. I was told she's now facing termination for initiating CPR. Is this accurate?" Karen Mitchell spoke up, her voice clipped and precise. "She violated St. Mary's emergency care protocol. Only physicians can authorize." "What was the alternative?" James cut her off. "Stand there and let a man die while everyone obeys your precious protocol." Karen's lips tightened. "Rules exist for a reason." "Liability." "Leonard served 2 tours in Vietnam," James said, voice thick with restrained emotion. "He was shot twice in Da Nang, earned the Purple Heart, survived malaria, and walked through fire for this country. You're telling me a nurse brings him back from the brink, and your first response is to punish her for it?" Warner sat back, defensive but curious. "With respect, Colonel, our staff acted in accordance with policies designed to protect patients." "Protect who exactly?" James snapped. "Because I only see one man who was nearly left to die, and one nurse who chose to act." He opened the leather folder again and slid a USB drive across the table. "Surveillance footage. Room 214. Provided by a staff member who believed Clara deserved to be defended." Dr. Warner hesitated, then inserted the drive into a nearby monitor. The footage played. No sound, just images. Clara racing into the room, jumping onto the bed, beginning compressions. 2 other nurses frozen in place. Clara yelling, gesturing for the defibrillator. Shock administered, pulse returning, and finally Karen entering, clipping Clara's badge. Silence in the boardroom. "What do you see?" James asked coldly. No one answered. "Because what I see," he continued, "is a nurse who did what was right when everyone else froze. What I see is someone who put her job on the line because my brother's life mattered to her. That is not a violation. That is valor." Dr. Warner looked away briefly. Karen cleared her throat. "Our concern is precedent. If we allow—" "Don't finish that sentence," James said. "Because if you fire her, I swear on every star stitched into my uniform, this will not stay in Rochester. I'll be on the phone with the Department of Defense, the American Legion, VFW, and every veterans medical watchdog group in the country by dinner. You'll be known as the hospital that punished a nurse for saving a Purple Heart veteran. You want precedent. That's your headline." There was a pause, a long one, and then the door opened. Another man stepped inside, gray hair, square jaw, pressed blue suit. He extended his hand. "Colonel Harris," he said, "liaison from the Department of Military Medical Relations." James turned. "Michael, you came." "Wouldn't miss it," Harris said, smiling faintly. Then he looked to Warner and Karen. I believe you've seen the footage. I'm here on behalf of the Pentagon's Veteran Care Advocacy Unit. We'd like a formal statement by 3 p.m. confirming Nurse Reynolds will be reinstated. Warner looked stunned. You? You can't make demands. We're not making demands, Harris said smoothly. We're offering clarity. You don't want to face what happens if this story becomes national news? Outside, Clara had just arrived. She hadn't been told anything, only that she needed to come in for an updated meeting regarding her status. Her hands trembled as she walked through the ICU halls. She avoided eye contact, certain that she was walking into her last day in healthcare, until she heard her name. Clara. She turned. James Garrison stood there, tall, stern, dressed like an American flag given human form. He stepped forward and did something no one expected. He saluted her, formal, sharp, with the same reverence he had once given to generals. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't just save my brother. You reminded me what honor still looks like." Inside the boardroom, Dr. Warner stood up. She looked at Clara, who had just entered behind James. "Nurse Reynolds," she said slowly, "the hospital has reviewed your actions, and effective immediately your suspension is lifted." Clara blinked. What you're reinstated," Dr. Warner said. "Full privileges. No mark on your record. In fact," she hesitated, "we'd like to talk about how we improve emergency response policies going forward." Karen Mitchell remained seated, silent, pale. James turned to Clara. "They almost let you fall alone, but not today." Back in room 214, Leonard Garrison opened his eyes again as Clara re-entered the ICU. His voice was raspy, barely audible. "Red hair," he said. "Knew you'd be back." Clara smiled, tears finally falling. "Still on shift, Mr. Garrison. I owe you," he whispered. She took his hand gently. "Just breathe. That's all I need." Clara Reynolds didn't return to the ICU as the same nurse who had been escorted out. She walked back in with her badge reissued, her head held higher, and the gaze of dozens of staff members following her, not with pity but with respect. She had become something few nurses in hospital hallways ever dared to be: visible, vocal, and vindicated. But for Clara, the reinstatement wasn't enough. Not when the very rules that nearly cost a man his life and nearly ended her career were still in place. The next morning, Dr. Warner called her in. It wasn't a disciplinary meeting this time. It wasn't even about protocol. It was something Clara hadn't expected. "I want you to chair a task force." What a committee? Warner clarified, to review and propose revisions to our emergency code protocols. "You'll lead it." Clara hesitated. "Why me?" "Because no one knows better than you what happens when the system fails. And frankly, I think the staff will trust you more than they trust me." Thus was born what staff would soon call, half jokingly, but also half in awe, Clara Code Red. Within 2 weeks, the task force was assembled. It included a trauma surgeon, a representative from legal and ICU shift manager, 2 floor nurses, and a member from the hospital's ethics board. But Clara chaired every meeting. In the first session, she brought printouts of 8 real incidents from the past 5 years when life-saving actions had been delayed due to rigid adherence to protocols. 5 of these patients didn't survive, Clara said, voice even. 3 of those deaths happened with nurses in the room. Nurses who hesitated because they were afraid of what happened to me. Silence. She let the weight of those words settle in. Then she added, "It won't happen again." The meetings weren't easy. Some doctors resisted, worried about liability. Legal reps expressed concern over expanded nurse authority. One administrator warned, "If we open this door, we risk chaos." Clara responded with calm, unwavering certainty. "It's not chaos. It's competence. We're not asking to replace physicians. We're asking to act when they're not present, because sometimes seconds matter more than signatures." What won the room wasn't just her logic, it was her lived experience. The committee voted unanimously to proceed. Over the course of 2 months, the new Clara Code Red protocol was drafted and approved. Nurses certified in advanced cardiac life support (ACLS) were now empowered to initiate CPR and defibrillation in the absence of a physician. Code Red initiation training became mandatory for all ICU staff with monthly simulations. All resuscitation attempts triggered by nurses would be reviewed but no longer punished under an updated Good Samaritan clause integrated into the hospital's internal policy. A peer support hotline was also launched to help nurses dealing with post-critical incident stress, something Clara insisted on after nights of not sleeping. St. Mary's ICU, once known for its rigid silence, began to change. It started with murmurs. If Clara speaks, you listen. She's the reason we have more tools now. We don't freeze anymore. Nurses walk differently now, straighter, steadier. They weren't just responders, they were protectors with authority. Word spread beyond Rochester. The Minnesota State Nursing Association invited Clara to speak at its annual conference. Her keynote, delivered with the quiet power of someone who had lived every word, ended in a standing ovation. Later, a hospital in Duluth reached out to mirror the protocol, then one in St. Paul, then a trauma center in Iowa. Clara Code Red became shorthand in nursing circles for courage under pressure. But the most unexpected moment came one Thursday morning. Clara was back on shift doing what she loved, checking vitals, chatting with patients, guiding a nervous intern through his first IV insertion, when she received a message, "Please report to room 214. Visitor request." She frowned. 214. Leonard's room. She walked in to find Leonard Garrison sitting upright, pale but smiling, surrounded by balloons, get-well cards, and his brother James. Leonard waved. "Told you I'd get out of that bed." Clara laughed. Barely. Then Leonard did something no one expected. He held up a small box. Inside was a medal one Clara had never seen. James explained, "It's the Civilian Defense Commendation, issued by the Department of Veterans Affairs. You're the first nurse in Minnesota to receive it." "I don't know what to say," Leonard chuckled. "Then just say yes." She did. That afternoon, in a quiet ceremony attended by hospital staff members of the local American Legion and Clara's parents who drove in from Mankato just to witness it, Clara stood beside Leonard as the medal was pinned to her uniform. James spoke briefly. What Clara did wasn't just about one life. It was about thousands of lives in the future that now stand a better chance, because one nurse refused to let a rulebook bury her instinct. The ICU staff applauded. Some cried. Even Karen Mitchell, standing quietly near the exit, lowered her head in what might have been guilt or maybe respect. After the ceremony, Clara sat beside Leonard's bed. "You look better." "I feel better," he said. But that could just be the morphine talking. They laughed. Then Leonard turned serious. "I hope you know you've done more than save me. You gave people like me hope. People like you. People who've seen the system fail them one too many times. You proved the system can change." Clara's eyes misted. "I didn't mean to start a movement. I just didn't want to watch someone die." "That's exactly why you should lead one." 2 months after the launch of Clara Code Red, St. Mary's Medical Center felt like a different place. It wasn't louder or faster or even more crowded. It was more alive. Nurses walked with purpose. Doctors collaborated without condescension. Or in emergency drills, once robotic and tense, now ran like choreography, each movement backed by mutual trust. The ICU no longer whispered protocol. It practiced preparedness. Every Monday morning, Clara led what had become a tradition, Red Room Roundtable, a 30-minute debrief in the former staff break room, now repurposed as a space for open dialogue. Anyone could speak: interns, janitors, seasoned trauma surgeons. The first few meetings were quiet, but on the fourth week, a night shift nurse named Sahana raised her hand. "I used the protocol last night," she said. Room 310. No attending in sight. I hesitated, then remembered Clara. The room went still. I started compressions. We got him back. "He's breathing on his own this morning." Applause erupted, not formal or polite, but genuine. Clara nodded, blinking back tears. That's exactly why this exists. To make sure no nurse ever has to feel like acting could cost them everything. What followed was a ripple effect beyond anyone's expectations. First, St. Mary's administration officially partnered with the Minnesota Nursing Board to draft a statewide training model based on Clara's emergency response revision. Hospitals from Duluth, St. Cloud, and even parts of Wisconsin requested consulting sessions. Second, the American Nurses Association reached out. They asked Clara to participate in a national roundtable titled "Courage and Care When Protocol Fails and People Rise." Clara almost declined, but James Garrison called her. "You're not just a nurse anymore," he said. "You're a reformer. Own it." She went. Her speech at the national summit didn't have fancy words or practiced cadence. It had truth. I didn't know what I was doing would make headlines. I didn't even think anyone would notice. But when I climbed onto that bed to start CPR, I wasn't thinking about protocol. I was thinking about the man in front of me who was dying. If I'd waited, Leonard wouldn't be here. And if hospitals keep asking nurses to choose between policy and life, we're going to keep losing people we shouldn't. There was silence at the end, then a full minute of standing ovation. Back at St. Mary's, the culture was shifting in more subtle ways. Clara began mentoring new hire cohorts. Each one was required to undergo scenario-based ethics training developed from her experience. They were taught not just how to follow steps, but when to step forward. The ICU bulletin board now held a new poster, "You are empowered to act." Under it, in Clara's handwriting, "If you hesitate, ask yourself, would I want someone to freeze if it were my heartbeat that stopped one afternoon?" Clara found herself in the hallway outside room 218. A young nurse stood frozen, her hand hovering over the crash cart. "You okay?" Clara asked gently. "I think I heard something wrong with the monitor. I'm new." Clara didn't give her a speech. She didn't cite policy. She simply stepped beside her. "Let's check together." They did. The patient was stable, but the monitor wire was loose. The young nurse exhaled in relief. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being here." Clara smiled. "We always are. That's the point." Elsewhere, Karen Mitchell sat in her office, quietly packing up her things. She hadn't been fired, not officially. But after the fallout, the media coverage, and a formal staff vote of no confidence, she had requested reassignment to an administrative role outside of clinical oversight. Before leaving, she asked to meet Clara. They sat across from each other in the staff lounge, two women once at odds now, older by experience. "I was wrong," Karen said simply. "Not about rules, but about how I use them." Clara nodded. "Rules aren't the enemy, fear is. Fear of what happens if you break them, even to do the right thing." Karen extended her hand. "You changed this place, Clara. I hope you keep going." Clara shook her hand. "I plan to." Then came the letter from Washington, signed by the Undersecretary for Health at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. It read in part, "Your actions on March 14th not only preserved the life of a decorated veteran, but inspired systemic change in how we approach nurse-led emergency response across multiple regions. Your story will be included in the national training curriculum for VA hospitals beginning next year." Clara folded the letter slowly, holding it like something sacred. She placed it in her desk drawer beside Leonard's thank you card and the photo of her first night shift 5 years earlier. And on a bright spring morning, a new sign was unveiled outside the entrance to St. Mary's ICU. "Clara Reynolds, Critical Care Wing in honor of courage that spoke louder than silence." Leonard was there. So was James. So were dozens of nurses who had stood a little taller since that day. After the ceremony, Leonard approached Clara. "You still working night shifts? I like the quiet," she replied. "Besides, that's when people need watching most." Leonard chuckled. "Still a soldier, huh? Always," she said. That night, Clara returned to her shift. Just past midnight, a new patient arrived. Elderly, post-stroke, fragile. As the team moved into place, the monitor blipped. Clara stepped forward, already reaching for gloves. No hesitation, just purpose. 2 years had passed since Clara Reynolds was nearly fired for saving a life. Now her name appeared in textbooks under sections titled "Emergency Decision-Making Under Pressure" and "Case Study When Courage Overrides Policy." Nursing students knew her story by heart. Some had posters of her, quote, on their dorm walls, "When it's your hands between life and death, move first, answer later." Clara never let the recognition change her. She still worked 3 nights a week in the ICU, still tied her red curls into a tight bun, still brought homemade banana bread to the break room every Sunday shift. But she had become something else now, something far greater than a name on a plaque. She had become a touchstone for what it meant to be brave in a system that sometimes forgot its soul. At the Clara Reynolds Critical Care Wing, a new tradition emerged. Every spring, the graduating class of St. Mary's nursing residency gathered in the Red Room for a private ceremony. Each graduate received their name badge and a small red-stitched patch embroidered with the initials CRRN. It didn't stand for her name. It stood for the values she lived by: courage, responsibility, resuscitation, Now, one afternoon, Clara received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a letter from a woman in California. Dear Ms. Reynolds, last month my father collapsed at a grocery store. I'm a new nurse only 6 months in. I was off duty scared and had no equipment. But I remembered your story. I acted. I started compressions. He survived. I thought you should know you weren't just there for one veteran. You were there for mine too. With gratitude, Jennifer Alvarez, RN Clara, wept when she read it, not from sadness, but from a weight she didn't even realize she'd been carrying finally being lifted. Later that year, she was asked to return to the national stage. This time, it wasn't just to speak. It was to receive the Florence Nightingale Medal, the highest international distinction for nurses awarded for exceptional courage in crisis. The award committee cited her not just for the moment she saved Leonard Garrison, but for leading a cultural shift toward patient-first emergency care. At the ceremony, Clara stood behind the podium. No prepared speech, no notes, just her truth. I didn't think I'd be standing here. I didn't want to be famous. I wanted to be useful. The day I performed CPR, I was terrified. Not of failure, but of the system I knew would punish me. But I did it anyway, because Leonard needed someone to move. So to every nurse, every med student, every intern watching this move, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because the heart you restart might just be your own. Afterward, backstage, Colonel James Garrison embraced her. He had flown in just for the event. Leonard would have been proud, he said, eyes misty. He still is, Clara replied. I feel him every time that monitor beeps back to life. James handed her a small velvet box. His Purple Heart. He wanted you to have it. Clara shook her head. I can't. He insisted, James said. He said, and I quote, she fought for me when no one else did. She earned this. Clara accepted it with reverence, fingers trembling. Then I'll guard it with my life, she whispered. That's what you've always done. Back in Rochester, St. Mary's continued evolving. The Compassion Over Protocol initiative founded from Clara's case had now spread to 12 states. National nursing boards began re-evaluating emergency authority boundaries. Clara was consulted as a policy advisor, though she often declined formal titles. I'm just here to keep the floor clean and the patients alive, she'd say. Still, her influence shaped everything from how nurses were trained to how they were supported mentally after code blues. In her spare time, Clara began mentoring local high school students interested in healthcare. One, a quiet teenager named Noah, lost his mother during a delayed code response at another hospital. He never spoke much. Until one evening during a mentorship dinner, he looked up at her and said, if the nurse had been allowed to act, maybe my mom would still be here. Clara put her hand over his. Then let's make sure that never happens again. He later applied to nursing school. On the 5th anniversary of Leonard Garrison's survival, St. Mary's held a remembrance ceremony in the ICU. Clara stood again in room 214. This time she wasn't performing compressions. She was lighting a candle. Next to her stood Leonard's grandson, holding a framed photo of the man who had once whispered red hair as his first words back to life. Grandpa said you were the only one who moved, he told Clara. And that's why he got to hold me. Clara hugged the boy. You're why I still do this. As the ceremony ended, a nurse walked up to her with a question. Clara, if you had to go back, would you do it all again? Clara looked around the ICU, humming with life. Staff empowered, systems improved, patients saved. Then she answered in less than a heartbeat. Because in a world full of rules, it took one red-haired nurse to remind them all that a heartbeat doesn't wait for permission, and neither should those who fight to save it.